In this video, I'll be analyzing the effects of dollarization in Ecuador. So what is dollarization and why is it used? Dollarization is the adoption of one country's currency, in this case the United States dollar, as legal tender in another country, in this case Ecuador. In the midst of a financial crisis and with its domestic currency, the sucre, reaching inflation rates of nearly 97%, Ecuador opted to replace its currency with the US dollar in 2000. Now this begs the question of what dollarization's intended purpose is when implemented in an economy. Some of the main objectives of dollarization include protection against inflation and devaluation, and also increased investments. Due to the stability and strength of the US dollar, investing in US dollars represents one of the safest investments. Here you can see the effects dollarization has had on Ecuador's inflation rate. Dollarization, however, has led to some negative effects in the Ecuadorian economy. The government can't control monetary policy, thus making them more vulnerable to economic shocks. In the years following the 2008 financial crisis, the US dollar has appreciated, thus making exports priced in US dollars more expensive and less competitive to buyers. Despite large increases in public spending, Ecuador's foreign investment level still hasn't been as high or stable as expected. So the question is dollarization beneficial or detrimental to Ecuador's economy? We'll start by analyzing the causes and effects of the low level of foreign investment in Ecuador. Ecuador's foreign investment level has remained one of the lowest in Latin America. This is mainly due to the unstable regulatory environment that the Ecuadorian government has produced. This causes potential investors to be very apprehensive about investing their money in Ecuador. For example, in 2009, Ecuador expressed intent to eliminate 13 investment treaties, including one with the United States. In 2013, facing a trade deficit of $1.1 billion, Ecuador created strict trade barriers with some of their most important and closest trade partners. Then, in 2015, surcharges on tariffs were increased from 5% to 45% on an estimated 32% of imports. An unstable regulatory environment and increased tariff surcharges are just two of the ways Ecuador has diminished its reputation to potential investors, which has ultimately led to their very low level of foreign investment. The crowding out effect has also played a large role in the low level of foreign investment in Ecuador. This is a graph of Ecuador's government spending. After dollarizing in 2000, Ecuador drastically increased their government spending. Since then, the spending has continued to grow year by year. Along with the large increase in government spending came a large increase in government borrowing. This borrowing shifts the demand curve of the loanable funds market to the right, thus increasing the interest rate and turning away potential investors. A stable regulatory environment and reduced public spending could help aid the level of foreign investment in Ecuador. Now we'll move on to the effect that the appreciating US dollar has had on Ecuador's exports. The appreciation of the dollar in recent years has caused exports priced in US dollars to be more expensive. The more the US dollar appreciates, the more expensive it is to buy exports with the US dollar. This causes countries to look elsewhere for their exports. One argument against dollarization is that Ecuador could use internal devaluation if they had control over their monetary policy. Internal devaluation is when a country intentionally decreases the value of its domestic currency. Doing this makes their exports more competitively priced. Some think that if Ecuador had control over their monetary policy and could use internal devaluation, they could fix their problem with exports by making their exports more competitively priced. In theory, internal devaluation would help Ecuador increase the competitiveness of its non-oil exports. However, oil is priced globally in US dollars, called petrodollars. And because Ecuador relies on oil for 52% of its exports, and oil is priced in petrodollars, this means that internal devaluation would have an effect on less than 50% of Ecuador's exports. Even if Ecuador was de-dollarized, 52% of the money from exports they'd be taking in would be in US dollars. And exchanging these US dollars to their domestic currency would drive the exchange rate up. You can see in this foreign exchange graph that the demand curve would shift to the right to D1 and the exchange rate would rise to E1. This rise in the exchange rate would be enough to cancel out the positive effects of internal devaluation in Ecuador, due to the large volume of export revenue being taken in US dollars. Although the appreciating US dollar in recent years has made exports priced in US dollars less competitive than those from other countries, Ecuador stands to gain more from a dollarized economy versus the theoretical alternative of a de-dollarized economy in which they use internal devaluation to increase the competitiveness of exports, which in the end drives up the exchange rate given Ecuador's reliance on the oil sector. By nurturing trade relationships and removing unnecessary and unfair regulations for trade, Ecuador can increase investor trust and confidence and thus raise their foreign investment level. If Ecuador can nurture these good trade relationships and create a stable regulatory environment, their exports, especially non-oil exports, will also improve, despite the appreciation of the US dollar. In conclusion, despite the perceived drawbacks of dollarization in Ecuador, I believe the nation stands to benefit greatly from the currency system in the future.